Good evening, everyone. This is Jason Grant, integral YouTube live stream tonight. We have two very smart chaps. I've already had a little bit of a pre-conversation with Robert Belgrave and Chris Painter. Chris Painter is the CEO of a startup called Omnitude Tech, and they are building a very interesting blockchain, what I understand to be blockchain connection framework. But let's start with the first question immediately. Chris, tell us what Omnitude is about. What's the purpose of it?
Sure. Hey, so it's Rob here. So Omnitude comes from really Chris's experience in this sector. So Chris has spent a lot of time, and I'll let him tell some of his own story in a minute, but Chris has spent a lot of time in and around the kind of enterprise e-commerce space, which is quite a specific space. And there's a lot of kind of common challenges that exist in that world around integration between different systems. So we're talking, sort of the likes of Pfizer, GSK, kind of global manufacturing and supply chain problems that people have. And so, that world is ripe for some disruption. And a lot of these guys are using very, very expensive, typically proprietary enterprise systems, SAP, ERP, WMS, things like that. And often there are extremely high costs associated with integrating all of these different systems. So, Chris has spent a lot of time professionally prior to the Omnitude journey, kind of building integrations for all of these different products and systems. And we could just sort of see that there was this collision course coming in the future for blockchain technology. And our prediction is that at some point in the future, a lot of these systems will either natively integrate blockchain themselves or will replace huge chunks of their functionality with blockchain. But having worked in technology our whole careers, we know that the dream and the adoption are two very different things. And actually, often there's kind of a long tail of, say, 5 or 10 years before these things become a reality. So we've set about trying to build, as you say, a sort of blockchain framework to help sort of solve that problem in a much quicker way for people, so that people, enterprises, rather than having to rip out their entire SAP ecosystem, for example, they can connect SAP to all the different weird and wonderful blockchain things that are coming out, along with some of the stuff that we're going to build as well. We'll get into that in a bit more detail, and kind of help people realize the value of all this different blockchain technology with a much shorter time to deployment and to adoption.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about people side of things. Tell us a little bit about your team, and also what are the customers or the users that you're going to be targeting with this technology that you're developing.
Yeah. So if I kind of go over, sorry, excuse me. The team itself. This is it's a blockchain project coming out of an existing company. So we've got a team that are already experienced in this sector. That we've spent, as Robert said, we've spent a lot of time building arguably the same integrations for different systems constantly. So it's one that the team involved in this project, although not specifically in the blockchain space, in the core part of it, which is the integrations and getting those integrations to work together, talk to each other, there's a lot of experience in. So we've got the team there from it. There's obviously the outside advisors and Rob. Myself, I've got 12 years experience in this sector, and a lot of the team have been with me for over 6 years. Customers, there's a lot of privacy around what customers we have got and what we can bring to the table. We're in negotiations with a lot of them about coming on to use the Omnitude technology, which as and when they get further along, we'll be able to announce, hopefully some kind of quite big names to be coming and embracing and using this technology. And I'll let you, Rob, tell you about himself.
Yeah, and so Chris, as he says, has got his full-time team that he's been working with for some time. My background, I come more in it from the sort of hosting and infrastructure side. So I've been running a scale-up sort of cloud consulting and hosting business in the UK for about 7 years, called Wirehive, which is, I guess, is sort of my day job as a CEO of that business. As the business has grown, I've stepped back from the day-to-day operations of it, and I'm involved in a number of different startups in the blockchain space. Having worked in technology my whole career and always been passionate about it from a young age, I sort of see this as my generation's .com boom. I'm in my early 30s now, and I just sort of feels to me like the revolution of what blockchain is going to enable is coming. I think particularly in 2018, we're going to see, you know, the good really separated from the bad, and a lot of the sort of snake oil projects are going to get found out, and I think we're going to see, you know, the beginnings of the sort of lasting legacy of businesses that are going to make a real difference. So yeah, Chris was someone I kind of met professionally. We'd done some infrastructure projects together. You know, knew that I had this real interest in the technology and that I was involved in some other projects as well, and invited me to come and, you know, help him make his sort of crazy idea a reality. Chris is one of these guys who've to him everything is simple, so he'll sort of explain something to you and almost like won't explain all of it, because to him it just is so obvious and simple, you know, that sort of slightly crazy inventor, you know, sort of genius level intellect. But so when I first found out about the idea, I sort of didn't really get it, and Chris and I met up and had a really good long conversation about it. And some of the existing clients, who unfortunately we can't name yet, that he's already working with, who are kind of interested in deploying some of this stuff, and it just seemed like an absolute no-brainer when we started to look at some of the different applications that we might be able to apply the technology to. So I don't know, maybe it's a good moment to jump in and talk a bit about some of those now.
So just to clarify, so therefore your solution is perhaps aimed more at a B2B kind of world, at least to start off with.
Yeah, very much so. Go on, Chris, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, kind of, Omnitude goes quite a bit further than just connecting systems. One of the big parts of the technology we want to enable is both us and the community to build apps that run within the Omnitude platform, and so that gives you the kind of the toolkit to then go and build new technologies based on these existing ones, and especially legacy systems. We've already had quite a few ideas around that in terms of what we see the apps we can build, but also we want to be encouraging, helping, and even in some cases funding the community to build apps within the Omnitude platform, to then further not only the technology between some of these existing systems, but the intercorrelation between even blockchain technologies, to then kind of do some really exciting stuff. And as far as I'm aware, there's not a project out there that's aiming to do that yet. And you know, that's what we're really getting excited about.
Awesome. So let's move into the system side of things. So how does this system work? What's the main premise of it? You know, run us through the kind of core sort of journey through the system, so to speak.
So on a kind of the explanations probably would take most of the rest of the interview up. So I'll kind of try and generalize it. Effectively, what Omnitude will allow you to do is push and pull data between any of the systems mentioned. Push, pull, adjust, merge, or translate data between any of these systems that are connected to it. So by having that ability, if we take one of the use cases that we've got, single sign-on, effectively anything connected to Omnitude, we can push and pull credential or login data to that system, which would mean anyone, say you had your identity stored within the Omnitude system, you could then, if you're signing into a site, pull that data down to enable you to log on using your existing credentials. You could take that a bit further by ensuring the system's deleted after your login or after your transaction. And that's, rather than it just being, you know, say just single sign-on, by having stuff built around smart contracts like that, log on that after your transaction, you might not want to store your data with that retailer, so that it can be just used to that point of interaction. Or another idea is to take that further, that, and this is something that, you know, as with any new technology we need to explore, is potentially the retailer doesn't need to know your details, only the courier does. So you can then arrange your own courier to pick up the goods, which you don't then even need to share your identity with the retailer you're transacting with. Or perhaps you just share your demographics with the retailer for them to enhance their marketing to you. Stuff like that, you know, I don't want to go too in-depth into a technical discussion, but hopefully that kind of goes some way to explaining on a very simple level what the technology does.
And that particular use case, I think the sort of key element of that perhaps Chris has glossed over there, is one of the big barriers to adoption in e-commerce, particularly with the sort of proliferation of the likes of Amazon as a single retailer for basically everything from food to electronics to fashion. And you know, is this problem that people have with that. We've all been there, right? You go onto a new site for something and you just really don't want to sign up for another site. You know, everyone's getting more and more concerned about personal identity, you know, personal information and you know, data protection, as they should be. And I think that, you know, people have this kind of perspective, rightly or wrongly, that smaller vendors and retailers perhaps don't have, you know, quite as well drilled security practices. So I think people are very apprehensive to sign up for, you know, small retailers, e-commerce estates. And actually, you know, talking to friends, family, and peers in the tech community, this is one of the reasons why we all use Amazon, right? Everyone has Amazon Prime, and everyone just uses it for everything. And so, you know, we think something as simple as just making identity management for e-commerce, you know, much slicker and more secure in the way that Chris has described, could be an absolutely massively transformational thing for the sort of third-party e-commerce space, and would, you know, might really help them regain some ground against the likes of Amazon. And so there's sort of lots of different elements to each of these things. But that's one example. Chris, why don't you pick another one from our list that we could talk about a bit?
Yeah, so take another one, kind of e-commerce fraud, specifically around kind of one interesting example that we can have is by including the supply chain into your, you know, a feed from the supply chain into your delivery. On every single order, a smart contract can be made so that actually on signing for the goods is when the point that contract completes. So you create the agreement to purchase some kind of goods. As we've all known, a lot of the time it doesn't arrive, or it goes missing in the post, whatever. So we have this contract between the retailer and the customer that it's only at the point that the feed from the courier company gets published onto the blockchain that money's done and the transaction's complete. You've then got other ones around the sign-on. If you can, the earlier example with identity, because your identity is stored and verifiable within the blockchain, there's a lot less risk of someone impersonating you, which is obviously a major part of current fraud in e-commerce, is either impersonation or, you know, kind of credit card spoofing, things like that. That by being able to verify data securely, that we're not just having a repository, it's something that you hold the tokens to, you control your own data, especially in Europe with the legislation that's just coming in. Ways of verifying data, I think, is going to be a key use of blockchain technology, but also ensuring that the keys to that data aren't held by one single party, but they're also held by the owner or user of that data. You know, everyone's then got the right to hold their own data. You can share it at the point you need to, and have a way to ensure that it's not been stored afterwards.
Makes sense. I think all those use cases make sense, and although they might sound at the face of it quite sort of boring, dull, and you know, just like nothing really innovative about that, like underneath it, you know, at the DNA level, they're very cool and critical. I fully like resonate with the idea of like 1,000,001 sites just to kind of, I don't know, do some, like buy some cat food. Like I've got always end up having cats running around during these interview times. But
I guess sorry to kind of interrupt then. One that I think I probably find a bit more exciting. I've taken the more, I guess the more technically exciting ones. Another one that we want to achieve is specifically around counterfeit goods within medicine and luxury goods, that we can take kind of consumer electronics, any product that's transacted through the Omnitude platform, we can store that serial number within the blockchain. So then from the point of manufacture, if you've linked your whole supply chain into our blockchain, you can track where that goes throughout the supply chain, specifically for any tampering or any strange behavior attached to that serial number between manufacture to delivery. But also then it also becomes kind of almost a V5. You can prove ownership of that product in the blockchain. And then more importantly, in the secondary market, you can prove that you're the owner of that product and you have the right to sell it. And then you can also prove, you know, the provenance of that item when it comes to the used market, which arguably then should increase the resale cost of that. Specifically things around, you know, phones or laptops that are stolen. There's this constant record of who the owner is. And when you come to sell it, you can transfer that ownership to someone else, which I think that, again, it's only kind of quite a minor app within our ecosystem. It's quite a major leap forward in technology.
Yeah, and serial number is one element of tracking. You know, you could take that a step further and look at bespoke tags, whether it's RFID or bespoke asset tags, you know, and making it even harder to clone. There's a lot of development going on in this space at the moment in terms of the sort of different type of labeling technologies that are available. And this is one of those things that, like, you know, the layman would think, oh, surely this isn't that big a problem, right? Like, if you take like the provenance argument around luxury goods, you would think surely this isn't a big deal. But from our work in these sectors, you know, working with some of these enterprise scale logistics organizations, you would not believe how much of this stuff goes on. And it's a massive problem. And we've got some statistics on, you know, just the sort of scale of it in terms of, you know, how much it costs those industries on an annual basis in the white paper, which people might be interested to have a look through. And we sort of illustrate all of these different suggested examples of how we might deploy the technology in there as well. We've sort of got 4 or 5 different use cases that we've pulled out. But for us, what's interesting is that all of these are kind of apps, as Chris put it. So for us, what we're trying to do is build the underlying technology that makes all of these different things possible, and then, you know, kind of kickstart the ecosystem ourselves with 4 or 5 of these use cases that we think are really pertinent. But then hopefully from there, you know, this is what really makes it a global business, and one that, you know, gets very, very exciting, is if the community then starts to utilize the underlying Omnitude platform and starts to build out these solutions themselves on top. So we're kind of aware that we're only scratching the surface in terms of, you know, what's possible. And if we can give people a kind of easy way to connect all of these traditional enterprise systems with the various other amazing sort of innovative platforms coming out in the blockchain space, you know, sort of in a relatively straightforward way from a programming perspective, hopefully then, you know, the in-house development teams at a lot of these organizations are going to sort of take that and start to innovate. And we might see some really amazing sort of 2nd and 3rd generation stuff come through as well.
Awesome. So that nicely kind of leads on to the whole area of innovation and product. Tell us a little bit about what the product is here, and how does this look in terms of, let's say, developers jumping in on this, and talk a little bit more about the aspect of apps, building apps on Omnitude. And Robert, we spoke a little bit about the notion of on-chain scaling and off-chain scaling. Can you sort of like roll that through together somehow into the innovation and product side of things, and talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So I tell you what, Chris, why don't I do a little piece on the sort of on-chain, off-chain challenge, and then maybe you could talk a little bit about Hyperledger and some of your work that led us down that road, because I think that's really interesting. So I won't steal Chris's thunder, but we're building this on Hyperledger, which is a kind of very interesting platform that not too many projects have utilized yet, but looks like it's going to see a lot of adoption over the coming sort of 12 to 24 months, we think. It's got some major people behind it, including the likes of IBM. So it's a very interesting technology. And in this space, this kind of enterprise sphere that we're in, it's got a lot of traction, but it doesn't seem to have sort of become as trendy, let's say, as the sort of classic ERC20 tokens on Ethereum or other kind of more mainstream implementations. So just to sort of set the scene, I think that you know, what we're seeing in the blockchain world right now is this sort of tokenization of everything. Like, people are just throwing every single challenge they can at the blockchain and sort of seeing what sticks. And in some cases that's with good intentions. I think in other cases it's just sort of rampant, you know, fundraising with a view to, you know, perhaps not being too concerned about whether they succeed or not. And that's kind of separate debate. But I think what's really exciting and interesting is in 2018, we're going to see a lot of these sidechain solutions to scaling coming through. So a lot of people watching this will be familiar with Bitcoin. So maybe we'll just sort of frame it against Bitcoin. So Bitcoin obviously is the kind of granddaddy of blockchain and a lot of the kind of stuff that we're all part of today as a result of the success of Bitcoin over the last 5 years. And Bitcoin has had a massive problem in the last sort of 12 months around scaling as transaction volumes have increased. And so in the early days, you know, the sort of Satoshi's vision crew think that all transactions should be done on the chain, which means that every single transaction, no matter how big or small, ultimately gets committed to a single distributed ledger and is stored for all of time, which means that, you know, every transaction that goes on the main Bitcoin blockchain, it's never going away, right? It's always going to be there. And as the chain grows over time, it's going to get exponentially larger. You know, the costs associated with storing it get larger and so on. But there's only so much sort of throughput available for that with that approach in terms of transactions per second. And already, you know, over the last sort of particularly last 6 months, as we've seen the transaction volumes grow, you might hear people talk about the mempool getting clogged up, which is kind of the place where Bitcoin transactions sit until they get processed by miners. And that's a problem because it makes it more expensive to process a transaction. It also makes it slower, which ultimately is an issue in terms of adoption, because we're only, you know, we're at the very beginning of this journey. And if we want this to be a kind of global currency or you know, see the sort of adoption we're all dreaming of, then we need to solve this problem. And the way to do that, I think, is with off-chain scaling. So the Lightning Network is the way that it looks like that's going to happen on Bitcoin. And the work that Elizabeth and the team, the Lightning Network, are doing is absolutely incredible. And if you haven't sort of watched all the videos and read about Lightning yet, then I'd encourage you to do so. But what this, you know, this is sort of long-winded preamble to talk about why we're going to need a lot of these different solutions to scaling transactions not on the main chain. And the Hyperledger implementation that Chris has ultimately selected allows us to do that, because we're pegging against either the Bitcoin or the Ethereum chains periodically, but we're actually going to do all of the work on our own off-chain solution based on Hyperledger. Which, you know, take for example the medicine market, right? If we wanted to say Omnitude's going to get used to solve counterfeit medicines globally, there's just no way that the amount of transactions that would be required to do that would work on something like Ethereum. It would just clog the network up on its own and simply wouldn't scale. So by breaking that out into our own bespoke solution, but then still pegging it against the much larger distributed proof of work networks on a periodic basis, you kind of get the best of both. And that's, you know, that's kind of our idea about how we would do this. But you know, again, I think just keep an eye out for sidechain scaling solutions and for some of the work going on in this sector. And Chris, maybe that's a good moment for you to talk a bit about what excited you about Hyperledger.
Yeah, so obviously, although the decision was made long before that, CryptoKitties recently, I think, kind of killed Ethereum for a lot of people. Not myself included. At the time, I was trying to send quite a few transactions, and the frustration of having to wait time for those transactions to go through, and the speed of them. Although obviously we're now seeing some, since the launch of our white paper, we're seeing them getting quicker and quicker. In e-commerce and specifically enterprise data, we need a constant defined time for a transaction to complete. We can't have variability. So within that, we can have massive scale within the Hyperledger. We've got a lot more control over the system, that we're not relying on so many other parties to then be running the system or being congested with other technologies. Like I said, like Robert's gone over, we needed a way to anchor that back to provide that. And the system that we've now got, I'm really excited about Hyperledger. I'm surprised that we're not seeing more adoption yet, apart from, you know, the massive names backing it. Kind of what we can achieve with Hyperledger, I think, is great. We're going to be doing private transactions within that, encrypted transactions, all on the fly, and in hopefully some quite gigantic scale. That for me so far, kind of the scale and the speed is not something we've seen before in blockchain. I guess that for me is the most exciting bit, and the names behind Hyperledger, and some of the ones we've had discussions with, and what we've seen they've been doing is, you know, it's really an exciting new technology.
Yeah, I mean, it's under NDA, so we can't talk about it publicly, but just rest assured that some of the biggest enterprises on the planet are actively exploring private deployments using Hyperledger. And I think, again, coming back to my point, I think everyone kind of misses this. Blockchain's going to change everything, but not necessarily on public chains. Like, there's lots of reasons why an enterprise would want to use blockchain within their own organization and would still get a lot of the values and the value and benefits that people talk about by simply deploying their own, global network within their own facilities. So it looks like Hyperledger is going to kind of be a front runner in that space. And I think, the amount of revenue that it's going to be responsible for is going to be absolutely ridiculous as a result. And that's why the likes of IBM are all over it, because they can see that they can build solutions on top of it that they can then sell into their kind of traditional, large corporate and enterprise base. So yeah, it's really exciting tech, and it's nice to kind of be one of the first projects to use it, we think, as well.
I know this might sound like a little bit of a funny remark, but what I worked as UX designer across different industries over the last 10 years, and one of the clients that I worked with was a company called Andy, which built Moshi monsters. And when I was working there, I realized that they had like 35 million registered users with like 2-3 million times concurrently using the system. And so are you saying basically that games like that, including CryptoKitties and so on, will be platform without it clogging up and with it being more or less real time in of it?
Well, one of the things that you'll be able to do is have more, I guess, defining of one of the problems with say Ethereum or Bitcoin is that you're under a lot of pressure from the miners, which is not something we have. We get more predictability around our resource. So the same as with any game, you can't cover every eventuality, but you can fix it pretty quickly, especially kind of in this now cloud computing world. We can spin up more and more nodes very, very quickly to cope with demand. We're not having to wait for more miners to then mine the blocks. And by having a bit more kind of optimization speed behind our transactions, we can also have the ability to scale up and down a lot faster than perhaps one of the existing blockchains would need. Also, the fact that we're going to have kind of notice of what everything is being deployed on our Hyperledger, we can then predict and add resource based on demand in advance of it, rather than it being a surprise.
Exactly, and just to answer your question directly, so yeah, I mean, Michael Acton Smith and the crew at Mindcandy have done incredibly well, right? With that, is really global success, and the short answer is yes. Like by deploying blockchain in the way that we're proposing, we would be able to quite carefully curate and orchestrate the amount of transaction volume you would need to make a game like that work, and also to box it in, right? So it's not gonna have this sort of cross chat problem where, like it did with Ethereum, where lots of people are buying cats and suddenly I can't pay for my coffee, which is a problem. The flip side is it's less decentralized, right? Like let's not beat around the bush. Like, that's the trade-off, is you have to accept that you're going to have more centralized command and control, because the Omnitude Foundation is, in our proposal, will have to delegate access to anyone that's going to participate in the network. So you won't be able to just spin up and participate in the Omnitude network yourself. It will be an authorized process. But actually, when we're talking to these enterprises, they don't care, right? Like, the guys that actually want to deploy this technology, they don't want to deploy it because they want full decentralized proof of work networks. They want the advantages, that this technology gives them and gives their customers. And you can still achieve those by having a carefully controlled, delegated, network, as opposed to one that is kind of an anyone can participate kind of free for all, like a lot of the public chains are. And so, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Your example is spot on, and that's the sort of use case that we would hope the community might look to build, right? Like, let's say they decided we want to do, Moshi Online or whatever. They could come to us and say, hey, we want to use the Omnitude layer to build this. please can you help us scope, you know, and box this in so that we can guarantee a service level and availability level for our customers. Because at the end of the day, they don't care whether it's like fully decentralized. They just want their users to have a good experience, right? And to be able to use kind of innovative technology to build a cutting edge game. And so we're sort of hoping that people like that will look to Omnitude as an opportunity to do that.
All right, so moving on to the money side of things, you guys are doing an ICO, and why you're doing an ICO, how much you're looking to raise, what that's going to go towards, you know, why should people invest into your ICO?
So we're still at quite an early stage in the project. We're due to shortly launch our pre-token sale, which will be $2 million, the value of that, which we'll be taking most major cryptocurrencies for on wire transfers. And then shortly after that, the main ICO will be happening. The funds for the ICO are to kind of form the foundation, build, you know, a project of this scale's pretty massive. There's a lot of work kind of we've done already around the integrations, but there's also a lot of work that we need to do around building the wider blockchain platform, dealing with, well, marketing it, driving adoption. Specifically, we've got some earmarked towards funding other projects that want to build within the platform, and obviously creating arguably one of the world's first global hyperledger platforms. So yeah, that's on a very short step. Obviously, there's much more details within the white paper as to what that's going for, and the roadmap's going to hopefully be released this week. We're just putting the finishing touches to that. But yeah, that's in a very short and sweet kind of way what the ICO is going towards.
Yeah, I think the key number is that 60% of all the funds are going to platform development. Like we see that the biggest cost here is simply going to be development time, just salaries, right, for the devs that we're going to need to build this out to the sort of complexity and scale that we're talking about. I think some other projects feel that a lot more of their challenges around biz dev and you know, sales and marketing. I don't really think that's our approach. I think we're trying to take a tech-led approach. You know, we'll kickstart it with a couple of these ideas that we've got, and try and sort of close out some of these partnership conversations we're having with some major companies, which will give us some revenue as well, which is, it's always great to try and build some profit early on, I think, in any startup. And then from there, hopefully the adoption kind of kicks in from the community, and we'll see that kind of second wave. But as Chris says, the initial pre-sale is, you know, nominal, and that's just to help us continue with the vision and build out the test net and get a kind of early prototype built. And then the main raise will be to help us kind of fulfill the rest of the dream and kind of finish the product off and get it out there.
And so, like, in terms of your ICO again, like, let's say to invest in Ether or two to get some of the Omnitude tokens. I was reading around the Telegram ICO that's going on, and like one of the insights that I got from that is that potentially there will only be, or at first they will only be opening that up to corporations. Remember why, but like so they're looking for like $1-2 million investments a pop. Are you guys aiming this ICO more towards the kind of enterprise market, or is it open to like individual investors? And for like someone like, for example, potentially myself or other members in our community, you know, what's their sort of motivation for investing into an Omnitude? What will that token do in the sort of longer term?
One of the things that's you know, we've kind of made an effort to do is that the token's got utility throughout the platform, and specifically interactions within the platform. So you know, one of the things that we haven't really gone on kind of discussed yet is that this also brings a lot of enterprise tech to smaller retailers. The key is that, you know, we don't want this to be another Oracle. The key is to give you the most advanced technology at a much simpler level and a much simpler integration level. So what that means is that, you know, your smaller, I don't know, 20 to 50 staff retailers can then get on and use some of these really advanced bits of enterprise technology that they haven't had access to before, because the integrations would cost so high. But part of that is that they're going to need the ecom tokens to start participating in this ecosystem. And obviously then it means that there's going to be a demand for those. We don't want it to just be controlled by enterprise. This is something that any technology like this, the wider distributed those tokens are, the better it is. We don't want any kind of whales, that it just becomes another one of those. We want it to effectively, the long-term health of this is a stable token price that then ensures that we're not at the stage that, you know, the tokens become so expensive that they're then unusable.
Yeah, and you know, I think the key to good token economics in any project is around some scarcity, right? Like, so you need some demand and you need some scarcity. So we're deliberately not having a huge float. You know, we think that having a reasonably low market cap is important to ensuring that the tokens retain good value. And in the white paper, there's some diagrams about how the tokens utility value works throughout the platform. Probably easier to just go and have a look through that than have me try and explain it, or it's reasonably complex. But the ambition of the design is, as Chris says, that the token plays a key part in the ecosystem as a utility, which means that as adoption of the platform grows, the demand for the token increases as well. So in theory, the cost should go up. Obviously, can't make any promises about that, but that's certainly the design of the token economics that we're deploying.
A key part would be, you know, we need a stable token price that then goes up. It's not up to manipulation. Sorry for jumping in there, Robert.
No, go on, take over.
The token price needs to be stable. We don't want one that's big red or green candles every day, that we've got a predictable price. To then, obviously, with that demand, that people aren't, you know, one of the big problems at the moment is that, say something's heavily baked into a project, you don't know what the cost of that is day to day.
Yeah, and that volatility is actually one of the things that I think the crypto industry needs to move on from before we're going to see mass adoption. I think a lot of the use cases around really, you know, pretty much all of the top 100 currencies right now, you know, this volatility issue is hampering adoption. And so getting to that point, and I think we'll see that over the next couple of years, you know, we'll see much more stability in terms of price. And that will make it much more viable for people to kind of roll out some of these integrations and technologies as well.
And so is just one more question on the token. Is it going to be actually tradable on exchanges, or is it going to stay within the Omnitude network?
So due to the nature of Hyperledger, it's not currently tradable on exchanges, Hyperledger tokens. So we're going to use an ERC20 token for the raise, and then at a later date, we're going to do a one-to-one transfer into the Hyperledger tokens so that we can use ERC20 for what it's good for, a transfer of wealth, as so many other projects that are using sort of different solutions are doing. And then our commitment is that we'll do a one-for-one swap once the Hyperledger tokens are more widely used and are tradable on the open exchanges. So our commitment is that we will always have a tradable token. And my personal prediction is that over the course of this year, the exchanges will all start to add support for native Hyperledger implementations, at which point we'd probably sunset the initial token and kind of swap it out for the Hyperledger one. But yeah, we're starting with the ERC20 for the raise because it's just the most straightforward way to do it. And then the plan is, you know, as soon as we can, to replace that one-for-one with something built natively on Hyperledger.
Okay, and so the final aspect of this is growth. You know, how is this going to grow? What's your plan? And there, I guess there's going to be a big role for developers and maybe small businesses to adopt the platform, for developers to build apps and extensions, expansions, and so on. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so one of the key parts, and you'll see within the raise, we've got money set aside to helping grow the ecosystem, and we want to encourage via documentation, help, guides, services and support to the community to then kind of drive adoption to this to the mainstream. That any kind of technology, we understand it's not something that we can control ourselves. We can guide it, but we want the community to be heavily involved within the growth of Omnitude and to make it, you know, a usable platform for everyone. So we want to be taking advice and listening to our community, what they think should be the future of the technology, alongside with our own ideas. And some, obviously, we have to take a certain kind of role in terms of guiding the technologies to what we think is best. But we also want people to, you know, feed into that community, the growth of the product. And over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it's going to go in certain directions. It's quite hard to predict where it is now, but the community needs to help us make those decisions as well. And we definitely see there's room for kind of Omnitude agencies working within kind of Omnitude itself, working on custom apps, reselling apps. There's a lot of kind of different ways that companies can get involved with that we don't want to hold the reins to Omnitude. We want to push companies, businesses, and agencies to be able to use the technology for themselves and their own ideas. And that kind of adoption then drives innovation at scale, which I think is a very important part of the project.
Yeah, and you get to that tipping point, right, with critical mass with this sort of technology, where once it becomes a, you know, widely utilized thing, then it sort of grows legs, and the demand just sort of carries on from there. So I think our job is to try and do some key deals with interesting businesses in the early days to kind of show the world what it can do. Make a really good job of sort of telling those stories and writing great case studies, and producing video testimonials of the kind of the way that people have deployed it and what they've done with it. Hopefully that then kind of ignites that next wave of innovation, and it starts to go from there. But I think, small retailers is definitely one area, but I think definitely some of these large enterprise deployments as well. And then, the sort of third-party integrations and apps is a really key area as well.
One of the other things is, obviously, this is a sector I'm very familiar with. So we know there's demand for this product. We're almost, with the build of Omnitude, putting ourselves a bit out of business, that we're solving a problem that's we've spent a lot of time developing over the past kind of decade. There is demand. We've spoken to a lot of our bigger customers, and some of those relationships we'll be using for Omnitude as well to hopefully then drive the technology further and drive adoption once more and more companies are announced that they want to embrace this technology.
Yeah, I find it that especially with these sort of platforms and effectively grounds upon which new goodness and innovation can be raised, they benefit from sort of person or a team of people who is just kind of constantly feeding ideas and sort of as to what the platform can be used for. Because I think a lot of people end up being kind of stuck for ideas, but once they go, aha, then suddenly it springs up all sorts of different apps and use cases and realizations as to what it can be used for. So I suppose I could foresee you guys doing lots of hackathons and these kind of to kind of inspire and
exactly,
get into that kind of goodness of innovating and developing, and God knows there might be some tokens to be won there.
Yeah, when the crypto and hackathon worlds collide, who knows what will happen? But you're exactly right. It'll be our job to kind of try and light the fuse and then kind of see what happens down the line. But I think the more of that we can do in the early days. And for me, I think it's a couple of really great stories, as I was saying before, of things you could do with the technology. And that's kind of what we've tried to do in the white paper, is say, look, we're going to build at least these 3 or 4 implementations that we think will be useful. But you guys think about what else you might want to build, right? And how you could extend that further and connect it to a different project even and things like that. So yeah, your assessment's spot on.
Yeah, I always found, because I probably in my lifetime I've been to about 20-25 different hackathons across different industries, and it's always somebody with absolute lateral thinking. I'm going to use this for this parallel thing here, and it ends up being kind of the most incredible thing. And we're all kind of the veterans of the industry, kind of sitting there scratching their heads, kind of of that. And
yeah, totally agree.
thank you so much for having this chat, and we're going to share it up into the group once again, and on our social media and LinkedIn profiles, all that kind of stuff. Thank you so much. I'm wishing you very best of luck with your project, and keep us posted on how you get on when it's ready, and who knows, we could have another conversation 9 months down the line, see how it's all going.
That sounds great. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. We really appreciate the
thank you so much,
your time as well. And yeah, look forward to coming and talking to you about the first crazy game someone builds on the platform.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you.